started. We're headed into, we've gone through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and now we're at
Numbers.
Numbers, right? We're at Numbers. So we're in the fourth book. Good for you, Kol Hakavod, that you've stayed for four or are joining us maybe for the fourth. But here we are in the book of Numbers. And I am going to mute everybody, and I'll leave it so that you can unmute yourself if you have a question, or you can raise your hand, your digital hand, or your real hand. I'll hope to see you when we do the PowerPoint. Sometimes it's harder to see, but just unmute yourself or send a chat if you have a question at all. And we will get started with our continuation of the book of Numbers. So I'm going to share a screen. And we'll get going. Hopefully you can see that. Yes? Yes, good. Okay, so here we are in Bamidbar, right? You see the Hebrew and the English of the Hebrew, not the English of the title that says Bamidbar. It's the fifth word, right? Remember we talked earlier on about how books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all get their name, how individual sections, parshiot, get their name as well, often from the first word or the first few words of the section that's being read itself. So this book, hold on one second. Here we are in the fifth book. This is our expanse, right? I thought it was such a beautiful picture. So Bamidbar actually literally means in the wilderness, or in the desert. So Ba is in, and Midbar is the desert or the wilderness. So that is literally the translation of the Hebrew name of the book, Bamidbar, but as you correctly noted, it is actually called Numbers, right? The fourth book of the Torah is called Numbers, and it gets its name from the census that gets taken, or actually more than one census that get taken during the course of the reading of this entire book. So though it's called in the desert or the wilderness, which is really covering our time in the desert or the wilderness, it actually translates in the English into Numbers, which is also what is delineated in the first I think 5 words or so of the portion. And the book really begins and ends with the census count. It is, I think, covers for the most part 38 or 39 years of our 40 in the desert. That is the narrative that it covers. This is our trek between Egypt and Israel, somewhere around-ish 1500 before the Common Era. And it begins, our story begins and our writings begin really at Mount Sinai, where the Israelites have received their laws and the covenant from God, and God is living amongst them in the sanctuary and traveling with them. This is before we reach the Promised Land, well before we reach the Promised Land, and God wants to count us to make sure that we are both counted and accountable, and that's the gist of our story. To make sure that we are fitting to be in the land of Israel, and you are going to see there are many twists and turns in the story. This is an interesting accounting of who we are and how we are as we are forming into a people, what we need, not just the formal counting of who we are, but the structures that we need to be a community to get us both to figure out how to live in diaspora for all intents and purposes, right, in exile, and then setting us in motion for how we can live in the land. So it's our 34th weekly Torah reading. There are 36 chapters in all. There are 9 parshiot, 9 chunks of text that get read. I don't know if you remember that we talked about the double Torah portions, that sometimes we have too many Torah portions to read in one calendar year. So there are some that are doubled up. We have 2 of those, depending on how many Shabbatot, how many Shabbats there are in a year. We have 2 potential that are doubled within the book of Numbers. The writings that are found here are a combination of storytelling, of narrative, of law, and then of record keeping, right? Very important. This is our numbers, and who is counted is also very interesting for us. It is men over the age of 21, not surprising, but this is how we keep count, and this is we hear also Some talk that this is our book of kvetching, our book of complaining. This is when our folks, not so keen to be uncertain about where they are headed, at times bemoan the fact that they have been taken out of Israel, out of Egypt, where as harsh as it was, the expectations were clear, right? And it was a slave mentality that they have. And I want to be careful to point out that when we say slave mentality, biblical slave mentality is not the same as American slave mentality. And sometimes we conflate those two, and we ought not to. Biblical slavery was awful, awful, but it's good for us to remind ourselves to look at it through a biblical lens, not through an American lens solely, though I can understand how that helps to inform things. So it is typically divided into more or less, I don't know if I put this slide, into 3 or 4 sections. This comes to us from Rabbi Plaut. That's our, can you see it? Can everybody see it? Let me remind you, for you, that if you go to your view on the top, usually if you hover over the middle of your computer screen, there's something that says view options, and there's a drop down in view options, and you can increase the size of the picture that I'm showing you, okay? So this is given to us by Rabbi Plaut, who, you know, the Plaut commentary is the big blue bound book that we have in our pews next to our prayer book. So when he looks at the book of Numbers, he says more or less it can be divided into 4 chunks. The first chunk, chapters 1 through 10, are really the regulations that are given at Sinai, and it's both demographic and legal material, including how the tabernacle was consecrated after it was set up, right? This place that God could move with us as we move through the desert. The second section, chapters 10 through 20, are really the highlights of the very beginning of our trek in between Egypt and Israel, and the peoples, right? We hear about their murmurings is the word that gets used. It's their fetching, their moaning, their complaining. Why did you take us out of Egypt? We don't have what to eat. We don't have what to drink. The leadership stinks. We don't believe in this, right? They're like really not our finest moment, but a defining moment for us as a people. And then we have an uprising. We have an uprising against the leadership. We're going to go through this in much more detail, but we have an uprising in the leadership with Korach and the other leaders. You see their names listed there. And then this second chunk also talks about the deaths of both Miriam and Aaron, Moses' siblings, the judgment of Moses to find new leadership. In fact, leadership gets passed ultimately, and I mean, it's a bit of a spoiler alert, to Joshua, who is charged ultimately with bringing the people into the land of Israel. The third and fourth chunks are interesting. It's the book of Balaam. It could be an entire course in and of itself. It is a bizarre book and a bizarre teaching. More to come, but more confusion also to come, I guarantee. And then the fourth section begins with the events that happened just before the invasion of Canaan, and the leadership, the kind of interesting leadership of Pinchas, a new census which is taken, and the division of land, who gets it based on tribe size, a little bit about gender as well, who gets what kind of land distribution, and then the laws that get set up, and the instructions for how to enter into the land. So that's in like big, broad brushstrokes, how the book is divided, and gives us our foray in. So far, so good. Okay. So here we are. This is Bamidbar, is both the name of our book and our first parsha. I should go back, by the way, and say the name Numbers and the focus on the census and why God is so concerned about counting, we are told, is that it is because God loves God's people and really wants to know who's there and take account of who is there, and so charges Moses to count all the tribes. Anybody know, this is for, this is the bonus round. Anybody know the total number of male Israelites, not including the Levites? They have a special category. Does anybody have an idea of how many people were traveling through the wilderness?
600,000.
Yeah, very nice. Ding, ding, ding. Just over that, right? We think, so did you look that up or did you know that?
That's a number that's stuck in my head, in part because people say there's no way in hell they could have supported 600,000 men plus women and children, and apparently elderly weren't counted either. This was a census for battle ready men or something. And
exactly, warriors, exactly.
No way
exactly.
they could have sustained that over this journey.
Right, right. Very, very nice, very nice. So often we see what look like inaccuracies in the texts, and by inaccuracies, I mean it couldn't have been, right? Like how could that have happened? Yesterday in Bible study, we were reading in the book of Genesis, and there was a scene that had camels in it, but we know that camels weren't really, beasts of burden at that time, right? And how do we accommodate and understand, what looked like anachronistic moments in our text that just don't seem to fit? And we take that leap, that stretch, and we have to wonder, what is it that they mean to communicate to us, right? So what is it that this probably 603,000 is what we're told, just over that, male warrior-like folks were doing in the desert, coming out of Egypt? What is that meant to inform us, right? That there was a critical mass, right? That we had a critical mass who were going through the desert. So we come to our very first slide. Hold on. And we are in Bamidbar. This is really our beginning of our history in the desert. This is, as I have said a couple of times, the counting of the Israelites. God, you see, commands Moses to take a census of all the Israelite males. This is our description for who is included in the counting and who isn't. Each tribe is assigned specific places in the camp around the tabernacle, right? It's a very, the specificity is very interesting, right? Or it's our organizing text, right? How we should live together. And to Dave's point, right? The sons of Levi are counted and their responsibilities are set forth, but they're counted somewhat differently than the people who are warriors. There's a census of the firstborn males who are taken, that is taken, and a special redemption tax is levied on them, right? And we know what corollary do we have of that now? Who knows? Who knows what ceremonial? We have a ceremonial ritual that's not observed so much in the Reform movement, but can be in the conservative and is in the Orthodox and traditional arms of Judaism. That firstborn males, there's the equivalent of a redemption tax. Does anybody know?
Pidyon Haben.
Yes. What do you know about Pidyon Haben, Liz? Liz, do you know about? I think you're muted, Liz.
Okay, better?
Yep.
Okay. My understanding is that it goes back to, is it Hannah? It's somebody who dedicates, says, if I can have a baby, I'll dedicate him to temple service.
Right. We don't mean like being a committee chair, right? We don't mean that, right? We mean the priesthood, right? Dedicated to the priest, right? To temple service, right?
Committee chair would be much too hard,
Right. Yeah, that's right. To temple service, right? That they're designated for temple service. So actually, firstborn males are meant for the temple service, right? And so we have to redeem them back at this time, right? That's Pidyon Haben. There's a ceremony that we have now that requires us to buy back our firstborn son so that he can be with us and not dedicated to the temple. Now, there are lots of questions that result from that since we don't have the temple anymore, right? So how do we understand that? And then last, God instructs Moses and Aaron regarding the responsibilities of Aaron and his sons and the duties assigned to the high priests, to the Cohens, right, to the Kohanim. There's a whole description of how the sanctuary ought to be set up. And Moses lists and counts all the different levels of people. He's charged with counting all of them, including the Kohanim, including the high priests. Okay. We go next to Naso, to this portion, which the things that I've highlighted in gray are kind of the big themes, and then underneath it gets a little bit more into detail. So this is what we do when when a husband suspects his wife is an adulterer. There is quite a significant test that is given to her, and the Nazarite and this connection between abstention living and ascetic life, right? One that is without very specific rules about the Nazarite, and the connection between living an ascetic life and a ascribed holiness to it. And I will say, the sages are very conflicted about the role of the Nazarite and the role of the Nazarite within our tradition. Aha, Josh said this was your bar mitzvah portion. Which part did you skip, Josh? The adulterer part or the Nazarite part?
I think I skipped adultery and went right to the priestly benediction. It seemed like safer territory.
Right. So, this portion is, and so much of Numbers is like it feels like, really, how come this is in together with this part of the portion? It doesn't seem right. The priestly benediction, may God bless you and keep you. May God's light, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'yechunecha, right? May God's light be shine unto you. May God's countenance be with you. Such a beautiful, rich blessing that no matter how old we are, whether it's for ourselves or for our kids, receiving it is, it gives me tingles to receive it. It gives me tingles to offer it, right? It's just, there's something extraordinary about it. Is in the same portion where we find the discussion of sota, right, of a potentially adulterous wife, and the Nazarite, right, and uncleanliness. And they seem not to go together, but in fact they are. So this is a section. Naso concludes the census with that's a census of the Gershonites and the Merarites and the Kothites. It's a description of their work and the sanctuary. It is there's more instruction. I don't know if you remember from Leviticus, all the different twists and turns that we read about with a person who is pure or impure based on a skin affliction. So here also we have God speaking to Moses about what to do with ritually unclean people who maybe have a skin affliction of some sort that they're worried about contagion, and also what we do with repentant individuals and how we deal with any kind of worry in the community and removing people temporarily from the community. Moses also tells people how to ask for forgiveness. Very important, right? Important on so many levels when we look at the content of this section, and the practices of the Nazarite, right, that they have to be dedicated for at least 30 days to be considered a Nazarite, with very specific ideas about not cutting hair and not drinking and abstinence, all kinds of interesting bits and pieces. This is one that can be, right, you see Naso 1 and Naso 2. This sometimes, depending on the Shabbatot that we have, can be a double portion, not typically, but sometimes. Yes.
Why would somebody become a Nazarite?
Right, there was a thinking that you were dedicated for more holiness, that you had a higher level of kedusha if you were a Nazarite, and in choosing, instead of coming through your line, in choosing to be a Nazarite, it was a choice to raise yourself up to a different level of holiness, with specificity that is intense. Lisa.
The part about not cutting one's hair, is that where Orthodox typically get, the payas? Is that related to the payas, or is that something different?
It's not. It's not to the Nazarite. The connection is not. You're not supposed to take the corners of your field, the corners of your like your beard or your hair as well, and you're supposed to let your hair grow. It's a different teaching, though there is, if you trace back far enough, there is a connection between that and not cutting your hair. So yes. There was one other hand up.
Who was allowed to say the priestly benediction? Is it
the high priests, the Kohanim, Right, which I think did we touch on it last week? It's dochanan, right? It's what you see sometimes in an Orthodox synagogue, where the high priest will lift his talit. Anybody with the last name Cohen will lift their talit up over their head, and sometimes do the priestly bend, the sign, right? And sometimes you see that on a gravestone as well. That was what the high priest did, and they'll actually put it inside their talit, lift their talit up over their head, and keep this hand motion while they offer it, right? To actually mirror the way it was offered then as the high priests did, right? So interesting that as we're thinking about our people coming out of slavery, right, and wandering in a very doubt-filled time, that there is right in here a very critical section around holiness when the people were in a very uncertain time, right, and this very clear focus on how to Moses is teaching Aaron and his sons how to actually offer the priestly benediction. So if you look right here, if you want to open, maybe we'll actually, let me look at that text for you. That is, so does anybody have a Tanakh with them? Let me open up for you 6:22. You see that citation right there? Does everybody see it? Hold on one second. And I will read to you 6:22-27 so you can hear specifically what it was. Okay. Adonai spoke to Moses, speak to Aaron and his son, thus shall you bless the people of Israel and say to them, Adonai bless you and protect you. Adonai deal kindly and graciously with you. Adonai bestow divine favor upon you and grant you peace. Thus they shall link my name with the people of Israel and I will bless them. Right, this is what we find. This is where we find the proof text, literally, right? Right. This is literally where we find the threefold blessing.
One quick interjection, if I might.
Yes, please.
It always impresses me how important it is to Orthodox that this be offered by the Kohanim. Rabbi Katz has sometimes talked about how when he goes to visit Tamar, he's the only Kohen present. And the Chabad folks will ask him to do the blessing because he's a Kohen.
Yeah.
Reform rabbi.
Reform rabbi or not, right. His designation as a Kohen is that's what holds, not what denomination, right? That's a lineage issue. So it's not even a denomination one. It's how we trace our lineage and our yichus, right? Our pedigree. Yeah. Okay, so now we move to Numbers 8. We went Baha'alotecha. This is our next portion. It comes from the words when you raise, right, the lamps. And so we know it's going to be a conversation as well, in part about timing and seasons and the sanctuary, right? This is where we hear more of the instructions of installing the menorah in the sanctuary, what to do if you forget to bring a Pesach sacrifice. And do I have this right? Hold on one second. Yes, and we hear some more murmuring and complaints and protests against. Hold on one quick second. Hold on. I want to make sure. I want to make sure I did this last week by accident. I had the wrong slide. Yes. Okay. No. Okay. Yes. Okay. So God speaks to Moses, talking about the menorah for the tent of meeting, right? That's the raising up of your lamps, and the Levites are appointed to serve as assistants under Aaron and his son. So here we start to see some infrastructure for leadership. Right, we start to see that there is some structure given to the community, and what to do if you forget your sacrifice for Passover. So here they are in the middle of the desert trying to figure out how to be and who to be, and we have kind of stuck in here this reference to Passover, although it makes sense in terms of the timing, right? We know that there's a cloud by day and a fire by night that shows God's presence over the tabernacle. That is a way to ensure and remind the people that even in the wilderness, especially in the wilderness, God is with them. And that when the cloud lifts from the tabernacle, the people can leave Sinai and continue their journey, right? This is the murmuring, right? The fetching, the complaining that the people are very free to share with Moses. Why did you take us from Egypt? There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to drink. We're going to die in the desert. This is no good. And Moses gets angry and he's frustrated. And God says, you can't do this alone. You need other people to lead with you and start to think about that. God gives them meat and then, for their moaning and their complaining, there's a plague that results. And we find Miriam and Aaron talking about the Cushite woman who Moses has married. There's some friction about intermarriage, as it were, and there's also we see some push against leadership, right? There's contention around Moses and from Miriam and Aaron and to Miriam and Aaron actually at the same time. There is tension, and really one of the focuses of this section of our text is understanding and responding appropriately to complaints, right? That is one of the teachings that we find in this text. Our commentators go even a step beyond that and worth consideration to say, what are the reasons that the Israelites were complaining so much, right? To think about the position that they were in, not just to see them as moaning, complaining, and murmuring people, but to think about and imagine how afraid they must have been, how uncertain they must have been, and before we criticize them for not having faith, think about what that must have been like, or even begin to imagine what that must have been like for them. So now we have our next section. We move to Shalach Lecha. This is, Shalach comes from sending, right? The word from to send. And this is where we find the scouting of the land and the spies who go into the land. We also have a nod toward the wearing of tzitzit. So we have 12 spies, each representing a different tribe, 12 spies, each representing a different tribe of Israel, who are charged with scouting out the land of Israel. They return. We know, how many of you remember this story, right? We don't often talk about spies in the Bible, right? So, and it's not the kind of 007 spies, but it's our Jewish version of spies, right? They go and they scout out the land. They return after 40 days, and 10 report that the land is fruitful, but that the cities and the countrysides are in fact filled with giants, right? Is what we know. And 2, Joshua and Caleb disagree, right? They urge the people to conquer the land, and the people again protest against Moses and Aaron, and are afraid, right? And are afraid, and God threatens to wipe out everybody, but Moses intercedes on their behalf, and there is a punishment that ensues, and God shares that all those who left Egypt would not enter the land of Israel except for Joshua and Caleb, right? Sorry, Joshua and Caleb, I think I just misspoke earlier. Joshua and Caleb were the ones who said that the land is good for us to go into, right? And Moses instructs the Israelites how to set aside challah, how to take challah. We have kind of tucked in here this observance piece around Shabbat, how you take some as an offering, right? And you burn it, that we ought to observe Shabbat, and how we ought to treat strangers, and the law of tzitzit. Those are the fringes on our talit, and also a nod to the blue string. Also another conversation for another time, but the blue that historically was a part of one of the fringes that we wear. We have Korach. Now we have our rebellion. We have this is the climax where the people really are butting up against the leadership of Moses, and along with 250 other leaders, we're taught that Korach accuses Moses and Aaron of being holier, claiming that they are holier than the other Israelites, and what business do they have saying that? And as a result, Moses asks them to bring offerings to the sanctuary, and that God will decide who should lead. And the next morning, the leaders are punished. Those who, the dissenters, right, the Korah and his followers are in fact punished quite severely. Does anybody remember how they are punished? No, some are swallowed up by the earth. There is fire, there is plague, right? There is severe punishment. And God really is so angry that God threatens to destroy the whole people. And as Moses intercedes, that is averted, and then Moses really organizes the priesthood to be headed by Aaron and his descendants, so that they can figure out how to not to have it be such a top-down model, I guess is the best way to talk about it. And the Levites are charged with managing all the gifts that are donated to the sanctuary. So we have our first real set of instructions, detailed instructions for a tiered kind of leadership structure. So far, so good. We come next to chukat, right? It comes from the word chuk, which means law, usually a ritual law, which is noteworthy. We have the word para aduma. Para is a cow, and aduma comes from the word adom, which means red. So this is where we have the red heifer. This is the ritual, the laws around and the rituals around how to purify a person who's come into contact with a corpse. Lots has been written. Pardon me, it's very interesting to see now who thinks they have found a red heifer in Israel of late. If you just Google red heifer, it is a very interesting read. Describes the slaughter and the sacrifice of Eleazar the priest, of the red heifer by Eleazar the priest. We have in here that the people arrive, the people are in the wilderness, and Miriam dies here. This is a noteworthy moment. This parsha, this book actually has much more presence for women than many of our other books, right? We have here that Miriam dies, and it is noteworthy. The people again are complaining that they have no water. In our earlier parsha, they complained they had nothing to eat. Here they complain they have nothing to drink. So Moses is instructed by God to strike the rock to get water for them. And Moses does so, and water pours out, and the people can drink, and they can water their animals as well. But Moses is angry at the people for their lack of faith. And this is a pivotal moment for us. God actually lets Moses know that because he was so angry at the people, that he won't be granted entry into the land of Israel. So this is where we look at, right, this is where we find the harshness of our law and the teachings, right, the midot of controlling our anger, right? Moses was so angry that this, we are told, is the shift when he ultimately, it results in his not being allowed to, he takes everybody through the desert, but he's not allowed to gain entry at any point into the land. Moses asks for people to be able to go through Edom, and the king says no, so they have to reroute, right? They have to, I'm thinking of Waze, right? It was the earliest version of Waze. They were making their way to Israel and to the land of Israel, and the king said, no, you can't come this way, so they had to reroute. Again, the people were upset. Along the way, Aaron dies, and his authority is passed to his son Eleazar. And after mourning Aaron, the people are attacked by the Canaanites. And this is also important, right? They are exposed, and their leadership structure has suffered, and they are tired, right? And they are weary, and they are attacked by the Canaanites, who they ultimately defeat with God's help, right? They continue to complain. The people continue to complain. They continue to complain. They continue to complain. God sends snakes. We know it's like also like I'm a visual learner, if you haven't guessed by now. So it's I also have that horrible scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark with all the snakes, but it probably wasn't that bad, right? It probably was some version of that, but we are told that there were snakes as a punishment, and that God tells Moses to put a snake, the image of a snake, on the top of his staff, and that when the people see it, they will be healed. But it's a reminder, right? And there are more attacks, and we see, right, there's battle you see with the Amorites and the people of Bashan, right? And there are more and more attacks, and at each time the Israelites emerge victorious, but emerge victorious victorious with God's help. So far, so good. And any questions so far? Okay.
Not a question, but something that just occurred to me. You said God tells Moses to put the snake at the top of his staff,
Mhm.
and the people will be healed. It's the same symbol as the caduceus in medicine.
Right.
That
Right.
must
And
be where it comes from.
yeah. You know, it's so interesting. Probably. I had
I
never
never
thought
put
of
it
that, but
together.
yeah, interesting, right? Very interesting. So here we are. This was that book that I told you, that story in Numbers in this book that is so perplexing. This is Balak. This is a decoding of his poetry and blessings. The king of Moab persuades the prophet Balaam to curse the Israelites so that he could defeat them and drive them out of the region, but he blesses them instead of cursing them, and prophesies that Israel's enemies will be defeated. God punishes the Israelites with the plague for consorting with the Moabite women. We see, and their God, right? We see often that punishments come from being like the others, right? For idolatry, for consorting, outside of the clan, right? And that there are punishments for that, and in a very violent scene. Pinchas kills an Israelite man and his Midianite woman just on the cusp of a sexual encounter, actually, and he tries to stay that. I want to just read for you what I hope will give some elucidation to Balak. So I'm gonna read this to you, and then you'll tell me what you draw from it. It takes its title from the son of, Balak takes its title from the son of Zippor, king of Moab. And afraid that the Israelites will attack his nation, Balak sends messengers to invite Balaam ben Beor, a well-known pagan prophet, to come and curse the people of Israel. And at first, God forbids Balaam to grant his request. And then the seer is sent, right? So this is where we have the nod towards magic, and we've got some magic in here, and some trickery, right? The seer is sent but told that he must say only what God commands. On the way, Balaam's donkey sees an angel standing before her and refuses to go forward. Balaam beats her, and after the donkey protests that she is being mistreated, right? So we have already, you're noticing there's a talking donkey. Balaam himself sees the angel. Fearful, he asks if he should return home, but the angel tells him to continue, warning once again that he is to say only what God commands. On 3 occasions, King Balak asks Balaam to curse the Israelites, but each time the seer blesses them instead. Furious, Balak tells Balaam to return home, and in parting, the seer predicts that Israel will soon smash the brow of Moab. Later, when the Israelites camp, they have sexual relations with the Moabite women and offer sacrifices to the Moabite gods, and as a result, they're punished with the plague. And when Pinchas, son of Eleazar the priest, witnesses an Israelite entering a tent with a Moabite woman, he takes a spear and kills them both. His action ends the plague after 24,000 Israelites have died. So this takes a significant chunk out of our people, right, and is a most bizarre read. I encourage you in your copious spare time to read Numbers 22 through 25. And I'm thankful to see that there aren't any hands up. So I'm going to go on, and we will look at Pinchas, but do go read about the talking donkey and curses that turn to blessings, because it is an interesting, it is indeed an interesting read. So we go, are we good so far? Yes, I know it's kind of a very, very quick run through. We go next to Pinchas, which is a very interesting read about leadership and a question about, is he dangerous or is he a hero? We have tucked in here also a very interesting whole section about the daughters of Zelophehad and land rights. We know that Pinchas is in fact rewarded for killing the Israelite and the Midianite woman who cursed God and who were on the cusp of lying together, sexually lying together, not just misspeaking, and that his zealousness, right? We have this tension, because his zealousness actually is rewarded by our being saved from the plague. He himself is rewarded with a covenant of peace, and his descendants with the priesthood. Like, this is a big moment for us, right? A big moment for us. This is a portion that talks about idolatry and as the rabbis like to say, whoring, which is not a word I typically use, but that is the word that the rabbis use, and the cautions that are registered against each of those, and the dangers that will befall the people if they don't change their ways. Here we take this huge jump from those prohibitions, those cautionary words, to Israel's fights and fights the war against the Midianites, right? As a result of this, the second census is taken, right? It's kind of like the census is kind of like the intermezzo in this right in this portion. And then we go to the daughters of Zelophehad, who are themselves noteworthy because they give to us a change in the laws of property inheritance. Their complaint is that land was divided historically by tribe and then given to the most senior male, right? And then underneath, right, if their father isn't still alive, then it's given to the oldest son, and so on and so forth. And the daughters of Zelophehad say, well, what happens if there are no sons? How is that fair? Why don't we get our property rights, right? And they present a collective and a compelling argument, and the laws of property inheritance are changed because of these daughters of Zelophehad. And if you can just say Zelophehad, you get extra credit. But if you can be also in awe to think that in biblical Israel, there were a group of sisters who changed the way property was distributed in a tribal system, it is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing to think that they did that. We have next that Moses climbs to the top of Mount Abiram, and he sees Israel, but he's informed that he will die there. He will die where he is and not, as I mentioned earlier, not be allowed into land of Israel. Joshua is appointed as Moses to be Moses' successor. And then we finish off this section with the sacrificial ritual for all festival occasions. We have a very detailed list of how things are to be done. You see it goes from right down here, chapter 28, verse 1, all the way to chapter 30. So it's quite a detail, right? Two chapters full of how to do the sacrificial rituals for the different festivals. So far, so good? Any questions? Let me just take a pause for a second. It is a lot of information. I am very aware that this is not meant to be chewed on in an hour, but much more than that. Lisa, I don't know if your hand is up from before or anew.
From before, sorry.
From before. Okay. Okay. So we go on to Matot. And Matot, we have here actually Matot Maseh, which can be, these are our last portions. And these are sometimes read as, hold on one second. These are sometimes read together and sometimes read separately. And they give to us the understanding of the end of our census taking. And Moses explains to the Israelites the laws concerning vows made by men and women, right? This is where we get the next section of our teaching. These are our matot, our tribes. This is where we find Israel waging wars against the Midianites and how the laws regarding spoils of war are outlined. It is really kind of descriptive for the most case. And the tribes of Reuben and Gad are granted permission to stay on the east bank of the Jordan River. This is the very end of our book. In it, we find a recounting of the 40-year journey from Egypt to Israel. We find in it Moses giving instructions for how to conquer the land, how to define borders, how to divide property, we have in here really an itinerary, right? It is a recounting of our travels. And Moses tells Israel to remove the current inhabitants of the land and that this land is going to be theirs, right? So this is for some quite a contentious text, right? Right? Is this, is it God given, right? Some people point to this text. The boundaries of the land are clearly defined, and there's a distinction made between murder and manslaughter and cities of refuge. It's so interesting that this is also tucked in here. Cities of refuge are established in the rules of those cities of refuge, so that people who are accused of murder or manslaughter can have a place to be until their case is meted out, right? And then we have a loop back to the daughters of Zelophehad, where we have a kind of addendum that is made. The laws of inheritance that were in the last chapter specified have a bit of a catch to it, and we are told that these women should marry within their own clans so that the land remains, right? So that's kind of the caveat, that the land should go to these women, but it should go to these women as long as they marry within, which we can understand makes sense, right? Makes sense. And my friends, that is the book of Numbers, actually in 45 minutes, just over 45 minutes. So let me see what questions you have, what things we did not cover, what you're wondering about. And if you had to, this is kind of the question that I ask in Torah study. If you had to explain to somebody what the book of Numbers is about in a kind of elevator speech, what key points would you pull out? What would you say the book of Numbers is about? Yeah, I don't know if it's Sheva or Josh who have your hand up. Or is that an old hand up?
No, we just raised it. I'd never realized this before. I knew more about the census aspect of things and the accounting of things. This is the Sopranos in a sense, almost. It's about leadership and the relation of power to the people and tribute. At first I thought it was, about how to run a board and leadership, but when you see the anger, but then the moments of grace, it's kind of like the ancient version of the Sopranos in a weird way.
Not quite sure what to say. As a lover of our text and sometimes having to wrestle with it, right? Right. Yeah, I think I understand. What you're suggesting, right? There was a lot of tension, right? Mm-hmm. and what lay underneath, those very tense moments actually gave birth to something pretty extraordinary, right? It gave birth to this system that allowed us to be with some sharing of leadership, right? It wasn't, right? It wasn't just Moses, right? Or it wasn't just Aaron, right? They were charged with appointing elders to support them and also to provide balance, right? Also to provide balance, which was very important, right? Yeah. What else? Yes, please, Donna.
I have problems with God not letting Moses into the promised land, especially when in the text, God was angry so often with the people and rained plagues down on them and did this other stuff to them. So is there is there something in the text that I don't know that explains that?
Right. So what do we do? It's such an important point, right? I mean, there are so many times, not just in the book of Numbers, right? There's so many times we really could look all the way back, a few weeks ago to Genesis, right? And God's anger with what Adam and Eve did in the garden, right? When we look at the God who we want to pray to each Friday night and Saturday morning and any other time we pray, right? And we think about a God who is loving and benevolent and kind and forgiving to the 1000th generation. How do we reconcile that God with this God who seems very punitive and very angry and spiteful in places, right? And how many times do our biblical characters have to protest, right? And say to God, no, please don't just, how many times does God say, I'm going to wipe out the world, mm-hmm. right? And could an omnipotent God just have done that, right? So what do we have, right? What do we have? We have a character development from a literary perspective, right? We have a character development of each of our leaders, right? we have the impetus, right? Our leaders who have the free will to say to God, not okay, not okay, right? Is God's punishment of Moses, Donna, I hear your question, is God's punishment of Moses so harsh that we can't find our way back to a God like that? That biblical God feels very different than our God that we understand today. I mean, at least for me, it does, right? What the question that gets asked is what was the God, or who was the God that our early ancestors needed, right? That they, when they were so unformed and so uncertain, and there were other gods lobbying, right? We're told, right? There are other gods other idols, right? That people were worshiping, what did God need to do to convince us to be God's followers, right? And this is where we see at times a very structured, rigid, heavy-handed, in an anthropomorphic way, a heavy-handed God, right? How do we reconcile that? Was it unfair that Moses saw but couldn't enter? Absolutely, absolutely. Does that radically change how we look at the story? Absolutely, absolutely. For how many of you does that resonate? That it seems cruel, right? Cruel that Moses couldn't make it in. Yeah. Tell me what other questions you might have.
Just a comment on that business. I mean, I agree. Many times I've said, oh my God, what's going on here? But I think probably some commentator has said this. I don't think I made this up, but it's an interesting thought that Moses gets punished as a leader for publicly, if you will, disobeying God and giving into his anger. The implication, to me anyhow, is that it's even more important for leaders of the people to be in control of their actions because of the example that it sets for the followers or whatever. So maybe that could explain the harshness. Still seems harsh.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Look, it's the piece about being Jews is we aren't expected to love all of our writings. We are meant to wrestle with them, right? We're meant to wrestle with them. And some of them, I'm glad that they sit heavily, right, with me. I'm glad that I can look at them and think, what do I do with that? And sometimes the answer is not much, not much. Read it in context, be deeply unsettled with it, and try to understand what it was doing in that time, what its function was, right? That's always the question in my head. What's its function, right? Well, what was it meant to do? And sometimes the answer is, I don't agree. I don't care for that. I don't like that, or it sits heavily with me, or I wish God had done it differently, right? I wish God had done it differently, right? Yeah. Ed and Bonnie, I see you have a hand up.
Well, here's my view of God from the business world perspective. Command and control was a characteristic of CEOs for decades and decades. And, a couple of decades ago, it was the consensus that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Today's CEOs are, at least the ideal ones, humble listeners, servant leadership. So God used to be a certain way. And today, at least my God is humble servant leadership and listens.
She's muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, but possibly. I mean, we here's the thing: we can't know definitively, right? We can't know definitively. We can wonder, and I think our engaging in the text and exploring it and wondering about it is why we're together at 10:30 on a Sunday morning when we could be elsewhere, right? It's our loving obligation to turn it over and to wonder about it. And to study it more, and just not just ba'alam, but to study it more and to wonder what we're supposed to glean from it today, right? And to wonder what I mean, you can't help make the comparison between plagues that were sent there and, a year into COVID, all the plagues that people, all the parallels that people have mentioned about, is this a plague of some sort, right? Did we need to be, I have many thoughts about that, none of them for public consumption, but right, many thoughts about, a God who sends a plague that kills so many. I don't think so at all, but what did the people learn from that, right? What are we, right? This plague is among us, right? This disease is among us right now, right? This virus rather is among us. What do we do with it? What do we do with it? And how do we figure out how to be a people with that presence, knowing the presence of that affliction, right? Any other thoughts or questions at all about, yeah, Marcia, please.
She's muted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. It occurred to me that by not allowing Moses to enter the promised land, God made way for the new leadership to take over.
Right. Transfer of power. Right? We needed that. Right. We needed a Joshua. Right. We need. Right. Yeah. Thank you. It's such an important point. Right. We needed that as a people. Right. We finish our text by saying, "Never again was there a prophet as great as Moses." Right. But we needed. Right. We needed him. We needed him, and then we needed his leadership to be passed. Yeah. It's a very important point. Thank you. Very important point. Yes. Yeah. So, here we are, we look at this 40 years of wandering, right? We look at this enormous moment in our people's history and understand it as helping us figure out from whence we cometh and to where we go, and what we needed to learn along the way, literally and figuratively, and how we had to form ourselves before we were, many would say, worthy to gain entrance into the Holy Land, and to do it well, and to do it as best we could with some sort of system in place for us to be a nation and for us to be a people. And these were some of the laws and regulations and teachings and expectations and considerations, right? Emotional considerations that we were given and that we experienced along the way. So there we are. We have gone Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. What are we going to look at next week? It's our last one. Deuteronomy. That's our last one, right? That's our last one that we will look at, the book of Deuteronomy, and I'm hopeful that we can go through that and finish Torah study and be done. Right? Just kidding. Right? That we can just finish our gloss of the 5 books, and really what my hope is that you'll come to Torah study when it works for you. We are actually still very much in the beginning of Genesis, so it is for those of you who have been at that table. It is a wonderful, complex, diverse group of people who gather every Saturday morning at 9:15 to do a deep dive. I'm looking just kind of around. Liz is here, and I think, and Herb is here, and Bernice is here, right? So all who attend at various times Torah study. There are some weeks that we get through 5 verses. We are right that we get through 5 verses of Torah. That's it. In English. We're just studying in English, but we really unpack it so deliberately and so carefully. So. Yeah, so there we are. So I will look forward to oh, I see there's a question. Yes, Numbers is typically read late spring. Late spring. That was the question. Is where we typically read it. Okay, so we are not there yet. So stay tuned and come. I'm wishing you good health and a good week ahead, and look forward to seeing you hopefully during the week or next week again.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you. You be
Thank you,
safe
Rabbi.
also.
Thank you.
CVS.